Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. The word strategy comes from the Greek word strategos, which means the art of the general, emphasizing its origins in military planning. And we are dissecting strategy today.
Hilariously, a lot of these words come from military planning. When you think mission, that's a mission, or space, I think
well, it makes
space
sense
travel.
It kind of makes sense if ultimately it was the, resource allocation and the plan and the how to win. It kind of makes sense. It does come from people
military
fighting.
Yeah, well, because back when we were doing a lot more wars, well, we're probably not doing any fewer wars now, but we weren't running these big global companies. So I think strategy and all of these things came from a world quite separate. It's sort of like sports analogies, right?
Yeah.
We borrow a lot, which is probably part of the reason why things like this get really confusing, because and we wanted to attack strategy because it is a word that comes up time and time again. We love throwing it around, but actually most of us really don't enjoy doing it.
It's time to demystify it.
Absolutely, because strategy is something that we can practice at every level. It is not something that is just reserved for those in the top boardrooms.
Yes.
It's actually something that we can showcase in every role that we do, but we often, because it is confusing and unclear what strategy actually means, we actually often overlook these opportunities because we think it's something that is one type of thing, where it's actually strategic thinking is something that we should practice all the time.
Yeah, it's not glamorous, I think is what you're kind of getting
at.
It's
the opposite of glamorous.
Yeah.
And I think the word can mean different things to different people. It often does. We often use it interchangeably with other words, and we often use it, we were just talking before about strategic planning and strategic thinking, and we just add the word strategy to the beginning of another label. It doesn't make it strategic, it just makes it sound more important.
The word in itself is confusing. And quite often, if we come in with different ideas around what that word means to a meeting, they can often become quite unproductive.
Yes.
As to what the ultimate goal of the meeting is and what we're here to do.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'd also note, in my experience, these planning sessions often get derailed by people diving really deep into tactics and into specifics around what the business should do, as opposed to how are we going to win?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is probably a biggie, is that planning and strategy are often confused. And often because planning's actually brings with it a lot more certainty. Planning is your projects, your budgets, your really clear, detailed things, how to achieve your strategy effectively. But because we like certainty as humans and we like a clear playbook, we often miss the strategy part and jump straight to the planning part, which are two very separate things. And we often say every week, every Monday we plan. We don't touch our strategy very rarely. We know where we're heading and what our guardrails or our constraints are around that, what our strategy is to win. But that every week we then have to plan what we're going to do to deliver on that strategy.
Yeah. But one thing I was thinking about was that strategy does seem too rigid, like it feels really inflexible. And why I say that is because I was quite surprised moving into the startup world. Not surprised, this was a great learning, is that our strategic plans and kind of where we were looking were no longer than a year out, because things changed so quickly. And what I noticed was, dipping back into governance or other corporates, was that they had like these 3 and 5 year plans, this inability to change and to mold as the environment changes.
Hilariously, you've just used the word planning interchangeably with strategy. A 5-year plan is how you're going to hit what you want to hit. And that is, again, a great example of where I think governance and executive teams focus on the plan, and the strategy should actually be somewhat set. Like, if we want to create the best professional development platform to close the gender leadership gap, we're not, that's not a 5-year plan. That's our strategy. Our plan will be, this year we're going to get 1,000 members, and well, that's actually our goals. But to get 1,000 members, what we're going to do is we're going to launch in Australia, we're going to run a ton of events, and these are all our plans to get there.
Yes.
But I think because people like to use the word strategy and we don't know what it means, we sit there and we're stuck in this planning mode.
I know. No, I love that. That's really great. What a good point. What a good point. And I can see it. Should we dip into kind of what it is? Or do we have...
I feel like one last thing on what it's not is it's often disconnected from the doing, right? And I see this all the time, actually a lot in some government agencies at the moment, where you've got this incredible group of frontline workers who are super in touch with their customers, the problems with operational stuff. You see it in tech companies as well, where there's technical debt or there's all sorts of operational issues. And then there's this group who aren't involved in any of that, coming up with these strategies. And I've seen it before in a lot of startups where they're like, we're going to be the fastest people to deliver X, Y, and Z. And their team is like, have you looked at our code base? We can't do anything with it because it's so riddled with debt. And that can lead to this real tension because your team sort of fights against the strategy because they're like, this is ridiculous. This is so ridiculous that we can't achieve it.
It's so interesting. I've been chatting a lot with Adeline about capitalism over the weekend, and she is doing a speech in her class about how horrible capitalism is, and she's so angry. She's so angry at the inequity it can cause, and at the it quite often perpetuates the social structure of patriarchy and all this stuff. I mean, it's very academic, but she is going to do this in front of her class, and I just had to kind of remind her, but there's lots of good things with capitalism as well. You know, the cafe you work at, this incredible cordon bleu chef, like she is a product of capitalism. She can go and do something she loves and put it into the market. And my point is here is that this disconnect is kind of over hierarchy. Like in organizations, we need hierarchy and we need to organize ourselves in such a way where we can have teams and resources being managed and capital being managed and distributed throughout an organization. But what it results in is this top level of people that have become incredibly disconnected from their customers, from their staff at the front line. The people at the front line become disconnected with the shareholder demands or just really big things, influences on the outside of this organization that define kind of what it is that they need to do to win.
Yeah, I love it because that will take us very nicely into what is strategy, because I think that is where if you are sitting in an organization and lumped with work that you don't know why you're doing it or that you are overrun with emails, this is your opportunity to think more strategically because we should all actually understand the strategy we're working towards.
Yes.
And there's multiple, you've got your high level ones, lower level ones that you're working towards. But because we've got that disconnect where, same with values, they're sort of decided by a small group of people and then handed down to people. If you don't have that connection, we don't all understand it and can tie our work back to it, it kind of becomes a bit of a joke. And then we've got the flip side, which is often senior leadership will say to people, what is the purpose of this? What is the measure? And people don't have the answer. And then they get really panicked and it creates this tension between those two sides as well.
Yeah. Well, what it is, strategy, let's talk about it. And I just saw this somewhere on the internet. Strategy is on the internet, where to play, how to win, and what resources to allocate. I know that we had at Hatch, we had strategy on a page, and in one page, it was like, the change in the world we want to see. What is it we wake up every day to do? And here's the 3 big buckets of work we need to do in order to win as a business and what winning looks like.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I love the idea of strategy being constraints because I think when you have a mission, like for us, if we have a mission to equip women with the tools and connections to succeed in their careers on their terms, which is our mission, then we could go about doing that a million ways. Like there is, and we've said it in our newsletter this week, we could create this incredible coaching solution that transforms how coaching is done. We could actually focus on executive leadership teams and how they help equip women with tools. We could do all of these different things. Yeah. But your strategy is going, no, we're not doing those things. We're deciding on the thing we are doing and the things we're not doing. Yeah. And that is the scary part because when you are deciding on the things you're not doing, those things are still there and they are options and other people are probably taking those options. So you have to be really confident that the path you've chosen to go down is better than those other paths. And that's why I think people don't like strategy because we hate failure and we hate sitting in uncertainty and we hate having to back one thing when there's so much noise around us challenging that one thing.
Well, especially because you see so many companies that stubbornly stick to their one thing. Perfect examples are Kodak and Blockbuster.
Yes.
And I mean, the fact that they were so stubborn about not putting their heads up and looking at digital trends that were happening around them and what consumers actually were starting to play with and want to do. And yeah, so it's quite an interesting, it's almost a paradox in that you have to, I love the constraints of what not to do, so important, clarity. But if there's inflexibility or inability to look at trends, then that's problematic as well.
Yeah, and that's where your strategy has to be somewhat open. I think Netflix is a great example. I don't know what their mission was on day one, but their initial strategy was to send out DVDs, like a better way for people to hire DVDs.
Yes.
And then they changed their strategy, watching the internet rise, the internet, the rise of the internet.
Yeah.
They changed their strategy to streaming. And that is a massive strategy shift. And both of them, and as opposed to the Kodaks of the world, the mission was probably the same. Their strategy for getting there changed as the world changed. And that is a very smart move that, like you say, a lot of organizations don't take. They just stick with what they planned 3 years ago.
Well, and that's what the plan, that was such a good challenge earlier on the podcast. But I do like this analogy of the road trip because it kind of fits in with that. If you kind of know where you're going and you have the route, I suppose that is strategy in terms of we're going to Oklahoma and we're taking the highway number 5, whatever. Interstate highway. But what happens where you stop and what snacks you bring and what music you play, those are all tactics. But if at some point, if there is a massive shift in consumer behavior or AI, for example, no doubt a lot of people are kind of going, okay, where do we go? How do we incorporate AI into our strategy? And ultimately our end game, is it just a tool we use? If there's inflexibility with how we're getting there, this is the problem. What I find so interesting about some of the world's leading businesses like Apple and Amazon, as an example, is their leadership teams live so far in the future. So interesting. I was listening to, and when you were chatting about Netflix, I'm like, oh yeah, Amazon started as Kindle, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, online
books.
books.
No, they started as online books.
Online books and then turned to Kindle? I mean,
they started as
thing,
online books for years and then went to an online marketplace and then went to Kindle again as the world changed.
Got it. Yeah, got it. But I was watching The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett, and he was interviewing Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos was saying, I hate earning results time because everyone wants to talk to me about earning results, but those results happened as a result of something I did 3 years ago. Like he was like, it's irrelevant. My brain is already 3 years into the future. And I love that. And I think it was also Steve Jobs, and we're going to get to some incredible women soon, but it was Steve Jobs that said 90% of my brain space is spent in the future and 10% is here in the present. And there is something about that is a luxury. It is a privilege once you get a structure, hierarchy under you of people executing on the plan, to have a leadership team that is genuinely future focused, which is quite interesting.
And again, I think you can demonstrate that at every level. And I think the other great example, Microsoft versus Apple, I love this example because for a long time, if you watch the annual shows that Apple would put on, it was all strategic. And if you watch Microsoft's same version, it was all about what Apple was doing. One of them was strategic, one of them was planning effectively. And I think the same with Tesla. And to your point about quarterly reports, they are the counter to strategy because Tesla I used to find it hilarious because I had watched so much stuff on their strategy and I really backed their strategy, and then they'd have like a 10% drop in what they got expected to deliver in a quarterly report. They didn't get 10% as much income as they expected, and their share price would drop, and I'm like, oh, you are all reacting to something that is unstrategic. Like, it doesn't matter that they didn't hit this one quarterly target. What matters is their strategy is the way they're going to win, and they will keep iterating how they do it to get there.
But the copycat thing is quite interesting, and China. And I know that I worked for an organization, 20 years ago, where our designs were copied in Asia and produced there. And that was a real business killer, which was interesting. And I kind of think of Tesla, you reminded me of BYD. And they used to do parts for Tesla, but your good buddy Elon, I don't know if he's your good buddy anymore. He was quite derogatory about them and their designs, and sure enough, they've just surpassed Elon, and perhaps their strategy was to copy and to do it faster
and cheaper. And I think this is where strategy is something that we don't like. is that Elon got it wrong.
Yeah.
His strategy was to get cheap labor in China, risking that they would copy, and he got that one wrong. And what happens when you get wrong? You get slammed.
Yeah.
And this is the problem
But he
with
also
strategy.
underestimated competitors.
Absolutely.
Speed,
but this is the thing about strategy is when you define a strategy, there is a good chance it's going to go wrong.
Yes.
And then what happens is you get slammed, CEOs get walked out, all of that sort of stuff. So we don't like it because a plan you're going to get right. Like if you just work hard, you'll get your plan right. You'll deliver on what you needed to deliver. You'll finish on a deadline. You'll get the outputs outputted. And you can't really get fired for doing that. Whereas if your strategy is wrong, you can.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we like, when we'd like to say a strategic plan rather than actually a strategy, because it's so much easier to get right. Even if it doesn't actually deliver anything.
I like that. Let's talk about some women, because I read a study from McKinsey, of course, that actually said that women are more likely to prioritize long-term goals over short-term results. And it's the strategic focus, because again, we're like figuring out where we need to go and how to get there. Strategic focus leads to more sustainable growth and organizational resilience. And it's why we see the measurable results of more women on senior leadership teams and those in charge outperform their company counterparts that don't have women on those teams, because we genuinely do focus on long term. And I think a couple women in for the win and strategic wins. One would be Whitney Wolfe Herd from Bumble. I love that she worked at Tinder, and I think there were some cultural issues there. She subsequently left. And what she started to realize that there was a changing landscape of what women wanted and often felt unsafe or didn't like the way they were interacting on Tinder. So sure enough, she launches Bumble, where women can make the first move. And I love that. That was a big strategic win of putting women in charge.
And hilariously, and I don't know this 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure Tinder was founded by a group of men and tech nerds on how do I make it easy for me to meet women. So that is a great example of a contrasting strategy of their thing was how do we create an app that makes it easier for me to get a woman. And her strategy was how do we create a safe environment for women to find a relationship. Very different strategies and led to very different outcomes.
Do you have any in mind?
What about Sara Blakely from Spanx? And this is an interesting one because, again, this strategy is now in an interesting position in the body positivity movement. That if she was to launch the same business now, it'd be very interesting to know how it would go, because Kim Kardashian's strategy has been more an entirely inclusive line of underwear that is not necessarily shapewear, but it also counts for all sorts of skin colors, blah, blah, blah. But Sara Blakely, when she started, her thing was how do I... and I always frame strategy in a question, but how do I create shapewear or underwear that makes women's bodies look better in clothes, or clothes fit more? You know, I always find this like they stick in funny places and stuff to just smooth everything out. And I don't think people backed her strategy to start. I get the impression that it took she had to work quite hard for that, but that was at the time. She backed herself and she backed that plan rather than just creating another underwear brand or whatever else.
And what I liked about her, she had to do it quite creatively as well. And I remember turning on Oprah at the time, and that was where she really got her win, was because Oprah, you get a Spanx and you get a Spanx. Did you know that? Did you remember
I just
that?
did the cast.
Okay, well, no, Oprah was a massive part of her. She had to get really creative, Sara Blakely, on how to actually... get the route to where she wanted to go. She saw the potential in a really underserved space and women that were unhappy with how they looked in, clothing. It was whatever. She saw a gap in the market. And she had to get really creative with how to get there. And Oprah was one of the massive launching platforms that got her there.
That's fascinating. And funnily enough, that's sort of a marketing strategy of how do you amplify the word. And I remember there was a Kiwi company actually years ago, and they paid like $300,000 to get Kylie Jenner to do a Instagram post or a series of Instagram posts on there. I think it was shapewear style stuff as well. I think it was like one of those stupid, sorry if people use them, but those waist trainer things, ridiculous in my opinion. But that post paid off in dividends. So that strategy, again, I feel like the way you can define strategy is you're not sure if it's going to work or not, but you've put all of your insights, learning pulled, if you're smart, pulled from every area of your organization to put together your best bet on how you're going to win.
I totally agree. It's a big
None
bet.
of those would work now. Oprah's gone. Influencer culture has changed so much that if you were to pay that same $300,000, you would not get that same result. It would not work now.
So true. Interesting. No,
What
it's
are
definitely the
any
big
last
bet.
ones?
Big bet. Yeah, well, Jessica Alba from The Honest Company has clearly gone very well, and she tapped into a growing consumer demand. I don't know if she started with personal care or was it baby care, but there was a real growing demand of people worried about what they were surrounding their babies with and the rise of plastic and phthalates. I don't know if that's the right way you say it. And she launched this brand on our kind of, again, our demand for healthy, conscious, natural products to surround ourselves and our children with. And yeah, has gone well. That was her big bet, was that people were going to spend a little bit more to buy these things, this Honest Company.
That's cool. And we've talked a lot about really high level strategy, but we did mention up the top how we can apply strategy at every level. So I just think maybe a couple of examples of how we could all do it. Firstly, I think you talked about finance as an area of a company that women are really successful in. We also are in day-to-day life. Women investors tend to get better returns than men because we have a strategy. Our strategy is to often to set and forget and not be swayed by market conditions, share prices going up and down, and to just keep putting money in and don't take any out. That is a very simple strategy.
Yep.
And it's a shared strategy. A lot of women share it, and they, as a result, get better outcomes. It could fail. You could be better off trading. But we pick that strategy and we stick with it. And then our plan is to just buy some shares every week and leave it be. So that is a way to think strategically, even on a very individual level.
Yep. Love
Any
that.
other ones?
Let me think. No, now you've put me on the spot.
I've got a couple more.
Okay.
I think the way we manage our day-to-day work as well is another strategic decision. So if you are run by your calendar, and I don't mean organizing your calendar to work for you, that people can put anything in your calendar and your day is derailed by what someone asks you to do, that is not strategic. If you instead sit down and plan your calendar at the beginning of the week and go, what is the biggest thing that I can do to contribute to our organizational strategy? You probably should know targets you're trying to hit and what is going to be most impactful. And you make sure you've got that top. We talk about pebbles, rocks, and sand. What are your rocks this week? And get them in. That is a way you can behave strategically, especially if you are then reporting that back to your manager on this is what I've achieved this week.
Yeah. I use this weird cheesy jargon thing of moving the needle because I actually see that in my brain. Like, is my time best spent here? And I'm actually moving the needle for me personally, growth, for the organization, for whoever I'm working with. And so I often have that almost like a speedometer in my head where I'm like, does this actually move the needle? Why would I spend half an hour on this?
Yeah, I totally agree. And then I think finally is challenging, is going, if I've got this piece of work and I don't really understand why I'm doing it, I probably shouldn't do it without understanding why I'm doing it. So part of strategy is there's no such thing as a brilliant idea in a room. A strategy is grappling. It's going back and forth and going with these inputs, does it still work? If this is the case, would it still work? All of those sorts of things. So if you get a piece of work and you don't really understand what it's contributing to, really taking the time to sit down and figure it out and figure out if the way you plan to do that work is the best way to do that work. And we talked about events. Like, that's an easy example of we could just keep rolling out events forevermore and going, but our strategy was we'd do events. But if we stop and go, is it working? And do we need to tweak our strategy a bit? You can do that in every piece of work you do.
Asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, it is critical. And problem solving.
Yeah, love it.
Okay, you've got a quote. I know you've got a quote.
I do have a quote, and it's from Whitney Wolfe Herd, again, CEO of Bumble, who we spoke about earlier. And she says, the best strategy for growth is staying true to who you are and what you believe in. Authenticity isn't a trend, it's a strategy.
Love it.
Yay. Okay, good. Amazing. I guess we'll catch everyone next time.
Yeah, I guess so.
Let's talk about a hard ending.
Strategy is to try and come back week to week. No, it's not.
Okay, we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.